For the residents of the quiet, sprawling Essex town of Basildon, Tina Cantello was a familiar and welcome sight, as regular and reliable as the morning paper. A 49-year-old mother of 3 with a perpetually warm smile, her job as a loan collector for Provident Financial meant she was woven into the very fabric of the community. This wasn't a job for the faint-hearted, it required a unique blend of empathy and resilience. Yet, for over 2 decades, Tina navigated this world with a grace that turned clients into friends. Those who knew her, and there were many, invariably described her as bubbly, lovely, and caring, a woman who brought a profound sense of kindness to a job that often required toughness. Standing at just 4 feet 11 inches, her small stature was overshadowed by a huge, vibrant personality that left a lasting impression on everyone she met. But on an ordinary, sunlit Friday in June of 2018, her familiar route through the suburban streets of Langdon Hills would lead her to a final door, one she would never walk away from. The sequence of events that unfolded behind that door was not just a crime, but a catastrophic explosion of violence. The subsequent discovery of her body inside the home of a client would uncover an act so brutal and senseless, it left the close-knit community reeling, forced to confront the terrifying darkness hiding just behind a seemingly ordinary neighbor's door. The ordinary day, the unthinkable disappearance. On the afternoon of June 8, 2018, Tina Cantello left her home to start her day's work. It was a day like any other, the beginning of a weekend, filled with the promise of returning home to her family for dinner. As a dedicated agent for Provident, a well-known doorstep loan company, her role was built on a foundation of trust and routine. She would visit clients in their homes to collect repayments, a task that required a delicate balance of professionalism and personal connection. Tina excelled at this. Her petite frame, measuring just 4 feet 11 inches tall, was no measure of her presence. She carried herself with a friendly confidence that immediately put her clients at ease. Over 25 years, she had cultivated good, genuinely friendly relationships with the people on her route, becoming a trusted figure in their lives. That particular Friday, her schedule was unusually light. She had only 3 collections to make in the Langdon Hills area, a quiet suburb of Basildon. She made her first 2 visits, exchanging pleasantries, collecting the payments, and moving on. Everything was completely, reassuringly normal. Tina was expected back at her family home around 7:30 p.m. for dinner. But as 7:30 came and went, the evening light beginning to fade, a small, gnawing seed of worry began to grow in her family's hearts. An hour passed, then another. Calls to her mobile phone went straight to voicemail. This was not just unusual, it was unheard of. For a devoted mother and a meticulous professional like Tina, being out of contact was profoundly out of character. Her family's concern, initially a low hum of anxiety, quickly spiraled into outright panic. The casual "she's just running late" reassurances gave way to a chilling certainty that something was terribly wrong. Late that evening, with still no word from Tina, they made the call they never imagined they would have to make, reporting her missing to the Essex police. What followed was an immediate and frantic search. It wasn't just a police operation, it was a community galvanized by fear and hope. Her desperate family and friends took to social media, posting her picture, the details of her car, and pleading for anyone, anywhere, to come forward with any information, no matter how small. The first major clue in the investigation was a gut-wrenching one, confirming their worst fears. Tina's mobile phone was found discarded on the side of a road, looking as though it had been carelessly thrown from a moving vehicle. The discovery sent a jolt through the search party and the investigators. This was no longer just a missing person. This was a sign of a struggle, an abduction, a clear signal of foul play. Police immediately cordoned off the area and began combing through the nearby woods, the discarded phone painting a very grim picture of her final moments. An ordinary Friday had fractured into an unimaginable nightmare. For Tina Cantello's family, the wait for answers became an agonizing torture. A mother, a wife, a cherished friend, and a familiar face to so many had vanished into thin air, and an entire community held its breath, praying for a miracle that she would come home safe. The investigation and the shocking discovery. With the ominous discovery of Tina's phone, the police investigation kicked into high gear. The frantic energy of the initial search now shifted to the methodical, painstaking work of a major crime inquiry. Investigators understood this was not a case of someone simply wandering off. The phone was a clear and deliberate act to sever communication, a hallmark of a violent crime. The primary objective was to reconstruct her final hours with absolute precision. They focused their attention on the most logical starting point, her client list for that afternoon. Her route was simple, her appointments pre-arranged. This gave investigators a concrete timeline and a limited pool of individuals to interview. They quickly confirmed her first 2 visits had proceeded without incident. This meant her third and final stop was the key. That stop was at the home of a 38-year-old man named Geoffrey Hutton, located on the quiet, unassuming residential street of Derby Close. Very quickly, that address became the focal point of the entire investigation, a single pin on a map holding the terrible, unspoken answer. While police meticulously chased their official leads, the community's own desperate search efforts, driven by the viral social media appeals, yielded a huge breakthrough. A neighbor, scrolling through Facebook, saw the posts featuring a picture of Tina's car. They looked out their window and felt a chill run down their spine. The car was right there, parked on their own street, Derby Close. They recognized it instantly and called the police, a citizen's observation that would crack the case wide open. It was now almost exactly 24 hours after Tina was last seen. Acting on the tip, officers descended on the quiet suburban street, the sense of dread mounting with every step. As they approached Geoffrey Hutton's front door, the carefully controlled scene erupted into chaos. Before they could even knock, Hutton himself came out of the house, and what they saw was a terrifying spectacle. He was covered in blood, his clothes stained and disheveled, and he immediately told the officers he needed help. The sight was alarming, but what lay inside the house was a scene of unimaginable horror. As officers entered, they were met with the grim reality of their investigation's worst-case scenario. Upstairs, they discovered the body of Tina Cantello. She had been the victim of a brutally violent and sustained attack. The frantic search was over. Tina wasn't coming home. The hope that had sustained her family and friends for 24 agonizing hours was extinguished in an instant. Hutton was immediately arrested on suspicion of murder and taken to the station. There, he began to spin a wild and convoluted story. He claimed that a mysterious, unknown stranger had broken into his home. This stranger, he alleged, had not only killed Tina but had also attacked him, forcing him to drink bleach and even making him stab himself in a bizarre and violent altercation. It was a desperate, tangled tale designed to cast himself as a second victim, a survivor of the same horror. But as forensics teams began their meticulous work processing the house on Derby Close, the silent evidence began to tell a very different story, one far more straightforward, far more intimate, and far more chilling than the web of lies Hutton was desperately trying to sell. The case against Geoffrey Hutton would now hinge on the careful, methodical work of investigators and forensic scientists to dismantle his elaborate web of lies. Understanding how evidence is used to expose a killer's deception and secure a conviction is a complex process. If you find these deep dives into the investigative techniques that bring justice to victims and their families compelling, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. Community in disbelief and the path to justice. It didn't take long for Geoffrey Hutton's fantastical story about a mysterious intruder to completely and utterly fall apart under the bright, unforgiving light of forensic scrutiny. The evidence against him wasn't just circumstantial, it was overwhelming and irrefutable. His DNA was found on the murder weapon, a damning link he could not explain away. Tina's blood was discovered all over his clothes, and the blood spatter patterns in the room were inconsistent with his story of a third person being present. There were no signs of a forced entry, no evidence of another individual ever being in the home. The jury at his trial would later hear the gruesome and heartbreaking details of the attack. Tina had been stabbed 30 separate times with a knife. It was a vicious, unprovoked, and frenzied assault that gave her no chance to defend herself. The judge would later note that she didn't even have time to press the record button on the device she used for work, a testament to the suddenness and ferocity of the ambush. Pathologists revealed the attack was so ferocious that some wounds were incredibly deep, demonstrating the sheer, unhinged force that Hutton had used against the defenseless woman. Her death would have been a matter of minutes. And the motive? As the prosecution methodically laid it out, the reason behind the bloodshed was just as senseless as the violence was extreme. Geoffrey Hutton was severely addicted to cocaine and was desperate for money to buy more. The judge would later address this directly, stating with contempt, "I am sure that he killed her because he wanted her money." His claim that he had £5 to give to Tina is laughable. He had no money. Hutton had invited Tina into his home not with the intention of paying his debt, but with the premeditated intent to kill her and steal whatever cash she was carrying. He had murdered a mother, a wife, and a friend for the paltry sum of around £60 or £70 he found in her handbag. The timeline of his actions painted a portrait of a cold and callous killer. Investigators found that just minutes after Tina would have arrived at his house, Hutton was already trying to contact his drug dealer. In a moment of grim irony, he mistakenly sent the text to Tina's phone, a digital ghost of his victim. In the hours that followed the murder, while Tina's body lay upstairs in his home, Hutton's depravity continued. He left the house to purchase drugs and was even searching for pornography online. These were not the actions of a man in shock or a victim of a traumatic event. They were the actions of a cold, remorseless killer, completely detached from the horrific violence he had just committed. During the 2-week trial, Hutton refused to take the stand, a move that allowed him to avoid any cross-examination for his fabricated story. His entire defense rested on the intruder narrative he had given to the police. The jury, composed of 8 women and 4 men, saw right through the transparent deception. They took just over 2 hours to deliberate before returning a unanimous verdict: Geoffrey Hutton was guilty of murder. The courtroom was filled with more than 20 of Tina's grieving family and friends, who had endured every horrific detail of the trial. Her daughter, Amy, bravely stood and read a statement to the court, her voice thick with emotion as she faced her mother's killer. "My life will never be the same again," she said. "It breaks my heart that my mum won't be with me when I get married." When passing sentence, the judge called Hutton evil and told him he had committed a terrible act of violence on a defenseless woman who did not stand a chance. Geoffrey Hutton was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 30 years in prison. But the story does not end there. In a final, grim chapter, on February 8, 2019, less than 3 months after his conviction, Geoffrey Hutton was found dead in his cell at HMP Long Lartin, a high-security prison. An inquest later determined he had taken his own life by hanging. Reports from the inquest noted that Hutton, who was profoundly deaf and had a documented history of mental health and substance abuse issues, had felt isolated and was not receiving adequate support in prison. The murder of Tina Cantello sent a deep and lasting shockwave through the community of Basildon and beyond. It was a stark, brutal reminder that immense cruelty can erupt from the most mundane of circumstances, shattering the peace of a quiet neighborhood on a sunny afternoon. Tina was simply doing her job, a job she had performed with kindness and professionalism for a quarter of a century. She was a familiar, smiling face, a devoted mother and wife, and a cherished friend, whose vibrant life was violently stolen for a handful of cash needed to fuel a desperate drug habit. The swiftness of the investigation, the conviction, and the subsequent death of her killer may have closed the legal chapter of this horrifying case, but for Tina's family, the pain is a life sentence of its own. Her daughter's words in court are a heartbreaking testament to the immense void she left behind, a future of stolen milestones, empty chairs at family gatherings, and memories that will never be made. The case stands as a tragic monument to a woman who was, by all accounts, a truly special person, described by the judge as someone whose life was precious and whose loss was felt so deeply. It highlights the hidden and often underestimated dangers that people in public-facing jobs can face every single day. But most importantly, it remains the story of Tina Cantello, a woman who deserved to finish her work and come home to the family she adored. Her memory is not defined by the darkness of her death, but by the warmth, the laughter, and the light she brought to the world in her 49 years of life.